Welcome to the Cup of Joe Show, where we explore the journey of recovery from alcohol and drug addiction. One story, one conversation, and one step at a time. I'm your host, Joe, creating a safe space for honest discussions about the challenges and triumphs of addiction and alcoholism. In each episode, we'll hear inspiring stories and uncover tools that make healing possible. Sobriety is not a one-size-fits-all journey, and you don't have to face it alone. Recovery is possible, and it's worth it. Thank you for joining the Cup of Joe Show. Now let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Cup of Joe Show. I'm your host, of course, Joe, and very excited to talk to my friend Hunter today. I'll tell you a little bit about him. Hunter's been living in recovery since around October 21st, 2009. He's absolutely certain on the year, but we'll call the date a solid guesstimate. At 40, he's been happily married to Amy for 7 years, his amazing wife, and together they share life with a beloved puppy. Hunter can fit in anywhere, is a big kid at heart, loves cooking, piling up for a good movie night, and unapologetically enjoys playing video games. He says, okay, maybe somewhat apologetically. He's an outdoor enthusiast, finds joy in yard work, gardening, and discovering new places, but nothing grounds him more than swimming in a crisp mountain stream. Hunter, how are you doing today?
Hey, Joe, I'm doing good. Glad to be here.
I really appreciate you taking the time. So tell me what it was like growing up, Hunter.
Oh, man. Well, growing up Hunter, I kind of grew up with a little bit of a duality when I look back on it. I started out in a little bitty town in West Tennessee, a very small town. It's the kind of place where we're about an hour from anywhere to like buy anything besides groceries. And, we would travel, once or twice a year to go buy your school clothes and kind of stuff. Like you had to drive an hour away to get stuff.
Like it was
little. And,
it was little.
But it was a nice little town. And my parents divorced probably when I was about 4 years old. My dad was a park ranger, and so I can't complain too much. I grew up half the time living on a state park, and that was pretty awesome. It's hard to complain about growing up living on a state park. Had a golf course that I could go to, and a lake, and basketball courts, and everything you can imagine. Hiking trails and wilderness, and so my dad's house was was pretty cool. I would literally, ride the school bus home and get off at the golf course and go hit golf balls, or I'd get off the school bus and go grab my fishing stuff out of the boat and go down to the lake and fish all afternoon,
Wow.
So it was really nice. And then, the duality was my mom is also an alcoholic, and she, at her house, it was very different. We moved around a lot. We sometimes went and stayed with family when we were with her. We were with her every other week. So, 2 weeks out of the month, I was living in this like paradise, and then 2 weeks out of the month, I was in this kind of volatile situation lots of times. And I look back on that a lot and think it contributes to the personality disorder I probably have that's not diagnosed. But it contributes some factors to the way I think and operate. And I've definitely seen that as I've been in recovery and worked on those things. But besides that, came from big families on both sides, lots of cousins. I had an older sister, and she ended up staying with my mom most of the time. So that was part of the duality too. It was I was one of two at my mom's house, and then at my dad's house, I was like an only child. So I got all the attention and all the fun stuff. My dad's house didn't have the drama of alcoholism going on. My mom's did. So I saw all kinds of things. I saw the a lot of the negative sides of drinking and partying. But at the time as a kid, I don't remember ever looking at any of that stuff and going, "This is awful. This is terrible." I
Yeah.
thought it was pretty cool, and
Yeah.
I liked to go into the parties with my mom and her boyfriends, and I can remember going to parties and stuff with them, and um, they'd be playing music and they'd set up a bucket or something, and I would play drums on the bucket while everybody in the middle of the band.
Yeah.
And so I was just, it was just a lot of fun. I don't remember being a lot of crazy stuff at first. But then my mom got remarried to a guy who was a pretty rough dude and pretty abusive all the way around to all three of us. And he moved us way out in the country. And I had a stepbrother. And me and him became best friends, though. And that was still cool, too, because we just stayed away from him and we spent our time in out on the farm. It had a big farm, and we were running around everywhere and chasing pigs around the woods and getting in trouble for playing turkey hunt with the guineas that would roam around on the property. We had a big time. I had my stepbrother.
Yeah.
But then there was also, there was the dark things that come with alcoholic homes lots of times. And, there was a lot of dark stuff, too, that happened. So I kind of grew up with that, doing that duality of learning to be one way in one place and having to be another way in another place, and having to switch personalities or change preferences based on what was going to happen wherever I was.
Yeah.
And I could see how that carried over into my adult life a lot. My mom got divorced from that man. She ended up marrying another man before she got sober. And he was pretty rough too. He wasn't abusive, but he was more just neglectful. He was in the army. He was never around, never there. And, I was like 11 and we would watch South Park together, which is probably inappropriate at the time, but that's how we bonded.
Yeah.
And, he would do fun things like make me like, he'd make me try to fight him to not in a serious way, but just like, come on, try to hit me, try to attack me,
Yeah.
And I was always little. I was a little bitty kid. And so I don't know, I just had lots of stuff like that happen. And then my mom got sober, and I should say at around the same time my dad and my stepmom. My dad had been remarried, and him and my stepmom, they started having their own children. And so I have three younger siblings that were all born within 4 years of each other. But that definitely had an impact on me too, I think, because I went from this only child vibe for like 6 years to, oh, I'm not the only child anymore here. And my place, this is no longer just my place. And I remember coming home one summer after being at my mom's for a couple of weeks, and my bedroom had been moved to the front of the house, and they had built this little wall in the dining room and put me in the front corner of the house, and they had turned the back bedroom into like a nursery and like a kid's room. And then when my second sibling was born, I can remember staying in a camper outside for a little while, which I didn't care at the time. I was like, this is awesome. I got my own camper. I'm doing good, but that was all happening around the same time, around 12, 13 years old, when my mom started getting sober. And that was a big turning point in my life in a lot of ways I didn't realize at the time. But she started to get sober. She got a DUI and had been in a car accident where she hit a van that was carrying the family of one of her best friends.
Wow.
And luckily, nobody was hurt, but that was the thing for her that said, all right, I've got to change. So
Right.
now she's been sober, I think 28 years or 27 years.
Wow.
But it started when I was about 13 years old. And that was a big thing in my childhood. She would end up, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when you say it was a big thing, was it like a big good thing or a big just different thing? Was it,
At the time, it didn't seem like a good thing. I was very embarrassed by it, because it was a small town, it was in the paper, everybody knew about it. And then my mom had to go to jail. I remember that.
Okay.
Serve her time for a DUI. I remember being real upset about that. And then I think I was a little embarrassed at first. And then she wanted, like, she would have, sometimes I would go to, like, I went to a few AA meetings with her when I was like a teenager. And I didn't really understand alcoholism or what they were talking about, but I did understand, but I liked them. I liked the people, is what I remember now, which is funny looking back on it.
Yeah.
And because I met these guys that were there, and I remember one guy in particular named Hero. Is what everybody called him. His name was Hero, and he was like this tough biker dude. He had a big beard, and he rode a Harley, and tattoos all over him, and he was just a tough guy. And I wanted to be a tough guy too,
Yeah.
I was little, and I wanted to be a tough guy, wild man. I wanted to be separate and unique from everyone. And so I remember this guy, Hero, I would always hang out with him, and he's cussing and smoking cigarettes like I'm, some 40-year-old man standing next to him. And I like that.
Yeah.
But, I went to a few meetings with her, and I was happy that she was getting sober. There had been a lot of incidents when I was a kid. One I remember was her having this longtime boyfriend, and he might have been an alcoholic too. I don't know. Can't diagnose him. But I remember him showing up at our little rental house we were living in, and they were going to go to the lake, and he had a case of beer under one arm. And as he started walking up to the door, I locked the door. I wouldn't let him in the house.
Like hell no.
Yeah. And he was like, and I was screaming at him, that when my mom goes with you, she gets drunk, and things happen, and it scares me, and I don't, I just remember not wanting her to leave with him, and him just screaming at me through the door and cussing me, and there was stuff like that had happened. So I wasn't disappointed that my mom was stopping drinking, but there was definitely some part of it that embarrassed me at the same time. But within a year of her stopping drinking, I do remember like having this very proud moment, because she had done so much service work in her first year of sobriety that she was nominated for Woman of the Year in Hardin County, which is where I'm from.
Yeah.
So she and I remember that was that stood out to me. That was kind of a cool thing that that made me kind of proud of her.
Sure.
But I also was somewhat indifferent at that age, going into teenage times. As I think I know I had a lot of resentment, and blamed her for a lot of the bad things that we'd experienced as kids. And until I got sober, I held those resentments over her, and I used them against her a lot once I started drinking.
Yeah. When did you start drinking? When did you take your
About
first
the same
drink?
time. That was the odd thing. Like, she got sober, and between 13 and 14 years old, I really started to seek out alcohol. I would say, my first drinks were when I was a little bitty kid, just being around parties and stuff, and the older kids would dare you to go get a sip of a beer, and you would, and everybody'd smell your breath and cheer for you, and stuff like that. And but when I really started to seek it out, I was around 13, 14. And my older sister was, she was already hanging out with a lot of older people, drinking, using drugs, stuff like that. And so I just blackmail her, and I'd be like, if you don't take me with you, I'm going to tell on you. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that was my MO, was I would blackmail her until she introduced me to the people, and then they became my friends. And so I got kicked off about that time, 13, 14.
Okay. So you looking back, do you think there were warning signs that, you know, maybe this could be a problem, like as as your drinking career started kicking off?
Yeah, I can remember in high school, and I drank fairly alcoholically right from the beginning,
Okay.
meaning to me that I didn't have much control over how much I drank. I drank as much as I could get. And, I really think the only barrier to my alcoholism but from 14 to 21 years old was my ability to access it. And, I would have been just as bad as I was at 25, at 15, if I could have walked into a store and gotten anything I wanted anytime I wanted.
Right.
But that was kind of the barrier. And, looking back on it, at the time, I didn't really think much about it, but I started to really arrange my whole life around drinking and drugs, and um, all my old friends that I'd grown up with, they kind of disappeared, and I replaced them all with people who could help me solve that access problem.
Right.
And yeah, so I had, my friends became people who could get me alcohol, mainly, and drugs and things like that anytime I wanted them. So
Yeah.
yeah, and
Well,
I think where it started to show up, is that what you're saying? Like where
yeah. Yeah.
early. By the time I was 17, I'd been introduced to some hardcore drugs, cocaine, and lots of pain pills and stuff. And I'd gotten into selling drugs. So when I was 15, I started selling pot. Um, and this was just even more of that access to alcohol part too. It was
Yeah.
all kind of hand in hand. And so started selling pot. And then by the time I was 17, we made a connection and started selling cocaine. And I had tried cocaine for the first time. I was double double blind drunk, and it was a Wednesday night, and I was with my sister and a bunch of her older friends, and I had to go home. They were afraid I was going to get in trouble, so they brought me in the kitchen and gave me a line of cocaine, and I was suddenly sober as a judge and ready to drink another fifth of whatever I drank and drive to Mississippi, and I was like,
Yeah.
let's go. So
Yeah.
after I found that, that became a pretty big part of the equation. And by the time I was 17, I was selling cocaine. I was always owing everybody money because I was a horrible drug dealer, worst drug dealer ever. I would just because my mom would go to AA meetings at night and stuff, and she worked a lot too. I always had a lot of freedom that my friends didn't have, so we would keep all the drugs at my house, and then I would be like hiding in my bedroom, drinking whiskey, and just shave a little off of the big
Yeah.
ball, and I'd do that and just don't sleep and go to school,
Yeah.
and so it started happening about 16, 17, 18 years old. I was already drinking pretty much every day, selling drugs, doing lots of drugs, and all the heinous and scary things that come with that, and hanging with a real rough crew of dudes. And I can remember one moment in time, though, to your question, that was strange to me. And I had this, what I called a trademark, because I thought it was real cool. And I would carry around little half pint bottles of Jim Beam, and I'd put them in my back pockets. And I'd go to a party or something, and I'd have two of those in my back pocket, and I'd be drinking beer and drinking Jim Beam. And I remember this girl that I dated for a little while was at this party one night, and I showed up and I'm drinking, And she made this comment to several people standing there. Oh, Hunter's here. And in this sarcastic way, she said, oh, and he's drinking whiskey. Look at how cool he is, or something like that. And I remember being like, yeah, I am cool. What are you talking about? I thought
Yeah.
she was like, it just puzzled me that she had found that to be like negative,
Yeah.
and made some kind of negative observation of me. And so that was probably the first time I ever like had something happen where I was like, why is she reacting to me that way?
Yeah.
Because I really believed everything I was doing was cool and I was having a great time and there was no problems.
Yeah. I think that's some of the lies we tell ourselves. Like we don't even realize we're lying to ourselves, I think. And then other people pointed out, we're like, what do you mean I'm not cool? I was just thinking, like, I was the same. I was like, what do you mean I'm not cool? I thought I was like the coolest guy walking around, and I wasn't even close. I wasn't even close. I was a mess.
I was a loser.
Yeah.
I was a loser, and I ended up. What happened with the drug stuff was I was always a take it or leave it drug user. I enjoyed and experimented with just about everything there is, but I could walk away from them. And alcohol was this thing that I couldn't do that with. It was essential to my being, And I think about it now, it's like I had friends after I got sober. They would talk about how one night I remember in particular, they were talking about music, how much they loved music. And they were both guitarists. And they were talking about when they found the music and they loved music. And that's all they ever wanted to do was play music.
Yeah.
And the only thing I'd ever felt that way about was drinking alcohol. It was the only thing I'd ever felt that way about. And I thought about how sad that really was. That it was my identity, and it was to me, in my mind, this is all I'm good at. And it's partying. This is who I am. And I couldn't imagine life not being that person.
Yeah. And now look at you.
Yes.
What did you try to seek help at any time, before?
No, I tell you what, the thing with the drugs was the closest I ever got at first, because I got in pretty bad habit when I was about 18 and I was still selling it, and I had to go to this house. It was the third time in the same day that they wanted me to come bring them some. And I remember there was a time in my life where I'd gotten into church around probably 12, 13 years old, youth groups, before I really started drinking and using. And I liked it. And but I remember going to these church groups, and I went to this house and took these guys some stuff. And the third time they told me to come inside, and I went into the back of the house, and there was a girl in there that I recognized from the little kids' church where I used to go to youth group. So she was younger than me, and she was in various states of undress. And I just remembered this sickening, nauseous, horrible feeling that I was contributing to whatever the hell was going on in there.
Yeah.
And and it made me absolutely sick. I was just filled with guilt and shame. And so I remember going home and telling my mom, laying at the end of her bed and telling her, I think I'm in trouble. I've got this problem and I don't want to do this anymore. And talking to her about it, and was being honest with her about what I've been doing. And my solution wasn't to quit drinking and change my ways. It was, I'm going to stay away from that. And so I got away from all that and stayed away from it for probably 6, 7 years. And right to the last couple of years I drank, I got back into drugs a little, but I just walked away from all that. And then I really did try to do better.
Yeah.
I think from that point, like I tried to do better, but I kept drinking. But my motives were better. and my philosophy was going to be better, and I wasn't going to be involved with these kinds of dark things anymore. But that didn't go too far. Yeah.
Did you go to college after?
I did. I went to college 3 times. The first 2 weren't very successful, buddy. Yeah, I went to college the first time. I remember when I was in high school, one thing I always loved is cooking, and I wanted to be a chef, and I got a lot of attention for cooking, and I'd worked in restaurants, so I really enjoyed it, and I decided I want to go be a chef, and I actually got invited to cook for this guy who was like a recruiter from a culinary school, and I went and did it, and he offered me a partial scholarship to come to their cooking school in Kentucky. And I was like, oh man, but I actually went to my dad at that time, and the way I remember it, he remembers it differently. We'll trust his is probably more accurate than mine, but the way that I remember going to him and being like, I think I want to go to culinary school, and him saying, why would you want to do that? And that's all I needed. I was so insecure and had the lowest self-esteem of any human being. And so all I needed was one doubtful person. And I was like, you're right. That's stupid. So I just instead I was lucky enough to get a good enough ACT score to go to a college. And I showed up without any kind of plan. And that was another one of those times when I noticed my drinking. I remember the first time I went to school, the first night I was there, I was in an apartment with one of my buddies from high school. And I realized I was in this place far away from home, and I didn't have access to alcohol. I couldn't just go buy it, and I didn't know anybody. And I was like, what am I going to do? I remember having a panicked feeling that first night we were at school because I didn't know where to get any alcohol, and I was 18 years old. And luckily for me, I guess, I walked outside and somebody was having a keg party in the apartment complex, and I met my new best friends, because that's all that's required. You can be a horrible person and terrible, but if you can get me some booze, you're my best friend. I'm loyal. I'm as loyal as an old beagle, But so that lasted about 6 months, and then they sent me a letter and saying, we don't think you want to go to college. You shouldn't be here. I had a 0.0 grade point average, and I rarely made it past the frat houses on my walk to campus for class, and I had friends there, and they'd be drinking at 9:30 in the morning. And so I'd say, I'm skip that first class, and I just wouldn't show up to any. And the only time I went to campus really was to find out where the party was going to be at night. I can remember doing that. I just go to the library. I still have nightmares today about I'm on campus and I can't remember where any of my classes are. Because that would happen to me a lot. Like I'd be like, I'm going to go to camp. I'm going to go be a student today. And I'd get on campus and wouldn't be able to find my class because I never went.
Yeah.
And, so screw it. We'll go back to the frat houses.
Yeah.
And that was rough. Going to school, I got flunked out and had to go back home with my tail between my legs to the hometown.
So what happened when you got home? Was it, did you go and live with your mom or your dad, or was it?
I went to stay with my mom. My dad and I were like best friends as a kid, we went on all kinds of adventures together. He taught me all kinds of great stuff. He's probably one of the biggest good influences in my life. But he also had an expectation that you're not going to get drunk and sell drugs and do all kinds of crazy stuff I was doing. So we had grown pretty far apart. And he had 3 young kids, He
Yeah.
couldn't have my crazy butt running around, those kids. It wasn't going to happen, and I just kind of knew that. So I went back and I just stayed with my mom and got a little job. And I did at that time, like I could see, that was one of the first times I ever thought, like, maybe I should quit drinking.
Yeah.
And so I got hooked up with these guys who were going to my old church where I'd been a youth member as a little kid. And they had a softball team. And I was like, I'll join the softball team with the church and I'll hang out with these guys because instead of my old friends, and they'll be a little bit more straight, and that'll help me. And then, I remember going to one of their houses one night and they're all playing beer pong. And I was like, oh gosh, they're they're all crooked too, like, oh well. And so I got right back in it. And I do remember at that time though going to this party one night and this girl was there and she was like, Hunter, this is the first time in all of the time that I've known you, our whole lives, that I haven't seen you with a drink in your hand. And that stands out in my mind. I remember that like a picture painted, standing on the back porch and her saying that. And I remember telling her, I've got something better. I've got Jesus. And then a week later, I saw her at a party and I was hammered drunk. And, and I felt bad about that. I was like, I wish I hadn't told her that. And, but yeah, that was the only time I'd try to quit before I got sober.
Okay.
But yeah, I just hung out there until, I met a little girl. She was 21, which made her very attractive to me. And we'd go to the liquor store. She'd get me whatever I wanted. I'm 19 at the time. And we spent that summer partying. And at the time, like everybody was partying,
Yeah.
And I think she expected that that's all I was doing. I was just partying. But then when the summer was over, she went back to school. She talked me into trying to get back into school. So I did. And she started doing this weird thing where she only drank on Saturday nights. And I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So we were going to different schools, thank goodness. And so I would drink every day, and then on the weekends I would go see her, and then I'd like try to just have a 6-pack, but I'd be getting just hammered drunk all week long, and then try to make it look normal on the weekends. And and I ended up quitting school after that. I went to a technical school, moved back in with mom again. And I started getting I still wasn't 21 yet. I was about 19, 20. And started getting in this place where I can remember it started getting really bad. I still couldn't go and just buy alcohol. And by that time, most of my connections and friends are either in jail or dead, or they've moved, or on with life. A lot of my friends got really hooked on drugs. So, that frustrated the heck out of me. I'd want to drink and they'd want to sit around and shave up Oxycontins. And I didn't understand them and they didn't understand me, So I was like, why are y'all doing this? Let's just go get a bottle of whiskey and hit the back roads. And they'd be like, man, you're going to go to get a DUI. Just sit down here and snort those Oxycontin. And I'd be like, I don't like it. And they'd be like, we don't want to drink whiskey. So I felt like I didn't have any friends and ended up back at mama's, but I can remember doing awful things there. She's trying to be sober and I would just dog cuss her, threaten to break all of her china in her china cabinet and destroy things if she didn't go to the liquor store for me.
Yeah.
And I look back on that like, man, that was awful, and I'd make her go to the liquor store. And, was working at like a Radio Shack, going to technical school and, going home at night by myself and sitting in the dark and drinking. And I was just in between 19 and 20 years old. And and then playing like I'm normal to this girl.
Yeah.
So
we're chameleons, I think. I think we're our whole lives, you know.
Absolutely.
Not everybody, but
yeah. And that was definitely, when I look back on my whole life, I was definitely the chameleon. And I'd morph into whatever you need me to be to get what I want, for sure. For sure.
Did you reach a low point? You know, what was like a low point for?
Well, yeah, the last probably, I turned 21, and that access barrier was gone. And there's a part in the big book of the program that I'm in, the textbook in AA, where the founder, Bill, in his story, he talks about a point in time where his physical, mental, and moral health fell off like a ski jump. And I remember first time I read that and thinking back to when I turned 21 years old. And that's what happened. It fell off like a ski jump. I was living with that girl. My secret was out. She realized, oh, he's got a problem, to the point where she would go out with her friends and she wouldn't let me come. I wasn't allowed to go out and be around her drinking and her friends because I always embarrassed her. And my 21st birthday, we went out and she had told me I wasn't allowed to drink any whiskey because, everybody thinks it's what you're drinking that makes you crazy. But I was crazy before I started,
Yeah.
It ain't what I was drinking. I was just crazy. And so I can remember that being a weird thing on my 21st birthday and being mad about it. And then I remember I started drinking whiskey anyway, and she got in a cab and went home. And I was by myself on my 21st birthday wandering around Nashville. That's where I was living at the time. She got rid of me pretty quick after that, which thank God for her. I'm glad that she did that.
Yeah.
And, I started, just getting worse and worse. I was working as a draftsman for an architectural firm in Nashville, and I was going around pretending I was an architect everywhere I went, And instead of a draftsman who made $15 an hour, I was an architect. I make $1,500 an hour, And that's how I pretended. I just, I was a chameleon. I just sit in there and lie to everybody and make them believe me. And, and it just got worse and worse. I started just cycling through friends, people that I'd met, mainly that I worked with, that I could con into let me sleep on the couch or give me a spare bedroom, and I started, I'd drink those up too, I'd go out and party all night. And my roommate would be like, hey, I need the rent the next day. And be like, oh man, I don't have it.
Yeah.
And like, didn't you go out last night? Well, yeah. What's that got to do with anything? And it's your fault. You didn't catch me before I went out. And, I nearly burned a guy's apartment down I was staying with one time, drunk, trying to cook some fried chicken and passed out while it was cooking, just stuff like that. I started having all kinds of things like that go on. I got some public drunkenness kind of things. Never went to jail, just some citations at the time when I was younger. And it just all started to kind of boil over till I got to a point where I was in trouble at work all the time and for my drinking. And I'd just kind of given, I don't know what I was thinking anymore. I'd call work and I would tell the little girl at the front desk, I'm too drunk to come to work. And I didn't even care anymore. Yeah. And she would cover for me, I'm sure, or I would have been fired. But I ended up going out one night on like a Wednesday night, man. And I would do this all the time. I'd be like, I'm going to go home tonight. I'm not going to drink. I was trying all those things we do, to control it. I'd set alarm clocks. I thought I had a time management problem instead of a drinking problem.
Yeah.
So I would set alarm clocks they would be like, stop drinking, at like 10
Mm.
o'clock. Because that's what's wrong, Joe, is I drink too late in the night. I'm having a
Yeah.
good time watching an old movie I like. And then, I don't get enough sleep and I miss my alarm in the morning, And so I do stuff like that, and it didn't work. I'd get kicked out of wherever I was staying and go shack up with a buddy or something
Yeah.
over and over again. But yeah, it got real dark. And then one night, I had a car wreck and I totaled my vehicle out on the interstate right outside of downtown Nashville. And I ran in a blackout basically. Woke up with my truck totaled sitting in like some kind of industrial park. And these guys were like shaking me. I got blood all over me. My truck's totaled out. And I just slammed the door. I'm like, I'm fine. And take off in the truck again until it quit. And then I ran and I didn't get caught. And I got a leaving the scene of an accident instead of a DUI. But when I showed back up to work the next week, they let me know that I had called them that night and told them if the police call that I was working late, and they said, we think you got a drinking problem. And I said, well, I do too, and I broke down, and I really did,
Yeah.
And they said, well, we want to send you to rehab, and I said, I don't think it's that bad. And they said, well, look what you have us do. We can't keep you on.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll go to some AA meetings, And I went to my first AA meeting. It was a girl that I worked with. I knew was in AA because my mom was in AA. And we had talked about it. And I was the kind of jerk that was always, she would go out with us for work, and I was always trying to get her to drink. I remember that, being ashamed of that. And so she takes me to this AA meeting, and I was like, I was sitting there I was basically telling her my plan for how I was going to get my life good and take care of all these problems, and then I'll be able to drink like everybody else. It's not a big deal. And I remember her telling me that she just looked at me and she said, Hunter, you're not going to get sober. And I was like, how dare you? You're supposed to be recruiting me to your club. And this is horrible sales pitch. But I went to that one meeting, and I remember that meeting to this day because there were probably 30 people in that room, and most of them probably looked like me or better. But the only person that I can remember is this old guy who looked like he was homeless, and he was dirty, had a big beard, and he was talking to himself, and he's sitting there in the middle of the room. And I looked at that guy, and I'm like, I'm not like that. I'm not an alcoholic. The only person I could see in the room was the absolute worst of everyone in there.
Yeah.
And I was like, nah, I'm not. So my idea was I'll get a new job,
Yep.
So I just took off, called up a buddy of mine that used to be a drug dealer, and now he worked for the Chinese fixing furniture. And he said, be in Baltimore tomorrow by noon. And I left everything that I owned. I couldn't fit in a duffel bag, and I got on a plane, and I went to Baltimore and started the last legs of my drinking career.
Yeah. And so I know a little bit of Hunter's story. So, but when you pulled another geographic, that's what, right? So you're in Baltimore. How long before things started crashing down in Baltimore?
Well, we went from Baltimore. We were all over the country. So we'd be in Baltimore, and then Miami, and then Dallas, and then Seattle, and San Francisco, and San Diego, and New York, just all over the place,
Right.
And everywhere we went, I had sprees, is what I would have called them. I was basically trying to white knuckle it, and I would try real hard not to drink, and then I'd break down, I'd have a drink, and then I'd have some huge blackout debacle everywhere that we went, and it started to get terrifying. really quickly. And that lasted about 9 months. But during that time, it was absolutely terrifying. I would have, I'd lose time where, I drank so much that I would drink a couple beers and black out. I didn't have to drink a fifth of whiskey anymore. I'd sit down and have a beer with the guy I'm working with, and we'd be having a conversation. And then I would come to in the bar, and I'd look around for my buddy, and I asked the bartender, like, "Where's my buddy I was here with?" And he's like, "Y'all left like 3 hours ago. You came back an hour ago, and you've been sitting here talking to yourself." And so it started getting real scary. And I wouldn't remember.
Yeah.
I wouldn't ever remember leaving or go anywhere or do anything. And that would be like 1 or 2 beers is all it took. And so started having horrible, horrible issues, blacking out.
So what was the turning point? Like, what was the looking back on it?
Well, I had this big blowout in Las Vegas. We were working there, and I had this feeling like I was going to die there. If I stayed there, I would die there. And I kind of wanted that. I was just so tired.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like these were just the cards I'd been dealt in my life, and I didn't have any way to change them, and I didn't know how to fold them either. Felt like I had to play them, and that it was going to turn out really bad. And I ended up having a big blackout, horrible debacle. The company I was working for, they sent me home. I locked myself up in a hotel room, and the only person left in my life who would have much to do with me was that mother that I hated so much for being an alcoholic. And I used her for everything. She had become my power of attorney because I couldn't manage anything. I couldn't pay a bill. I can't barely keep my teeth brushed. I remember when I first got sober, I had to have teeth pulled because they were so bad. And I asked the dentist, "Will alcohol affect your teeth?" And he said, "Well, if you're too drunk to brush them." I was like, well, okay, that makes sense why we're having to pull these teeth. But I'm a non-functioning alcoholic, Joe. I'm just stumbling from one con to the next until my card gets pulled. And my card got pulled, and I went back to my hometown, and that was in December of 2008. And my mom took me to my first AA meeting, and I was out of my mind. When I look back on it, I was absolutely out of my mind. I ended up working in mental health later on in my life, and I remember having this patient once who was diagnosed homicidal schizophrenic, and he would sit in front of you and tell you about how he talks to animals, and they talk back to him, and how they tell him to do things and all this stuff. But he was so convinced of this delusion that, I'm looking over my shoulders. There's really a donkey behind me telling this guy what to say. He's so convinced of his delusion. And I look at my own life, how I felt, and I was that convinced of my delusion that I would be able to control and manage this problem. And even after all that scary stuff happened, I came back to my hometown, start going to AA, and I ended up drinking again. And so I spent about the first year after I come into recovery, going back out every 2-3 weeks and lying about it and never being honest. And, and I would get a sponsor and not do anything he said or just appease him and, and secretly cuss him out, I just never would do it, but I still had it in my mind that somehow, some way, I'll get everything else fixed, and then I'll be able to fix this problem. And it didn't work.
So what was the jumping off point?
The jumping off point was a belly full of beer and a head full of AA, I guess. I remember going out I was living in another town. My best friend played a big part in my recovery is my friend Gerald, and he was the only sober friend I had, and he's quadriplegic. And he had invited me to come live with him and work for him and take care of him. And he encouraged me to go back to school and get sober. And so I was trying to do that, and I ended up not being able to fulfill that. And he told me, "You can't live here and drink." And that coupled with I remember my last drunk I came to the next morning, and that phrase out of the book, and I heard it said 1,000,000 times and in hundreds of meetings, that at certain times the real alcoholic has no mental defense against the first drink.
Mm.
And I finally realized that was true for me. I wasn't going to be able to get smarter than this or think through it or whatever, learn enough to keep myself from drinking. I knew that I was going to drink again, and I really didn't want to anymore. And that scared me to death. And I had that deflation at depth from that moment on. And I went back to AA, and a guy heard me crying about it in 3 meetings and talking about how I've tried AA and it's not going to work for me. And I know I'm going to drink again and blah, 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 blah. And he pulled me aside and he said, "You need to work the effing steps." And I was like, "What?" You know? And he said, "Meet me here on Saturday morning at whatever time." And I was like, "Okay." And I showed up, and we started working the steps together. And that was when that's when things really started to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did they change? Like, what did you notice first? Like, maybe your first kind of, wow, my life is different moment.
Definitely. I don't know. I'd picked up so many beginner chips. That's why my sobriety date's a guesstimate.
Yeah.
Because I really didn't think it was going to work. I thought I'd tried AA. I thought I'd tried to get sober, and it wasn't going to work for me, and I was just doomed. And so I didn't even write down the day, you know. So really, I didn't think it was going to work at all. And then I remember there was this one big moment where I had this day, and I was just going through my usual routine. I've been doing step work, really getting a lot out of it. I started to pray, which I hated at first. I didn't want a spiritual solution to my problem, but that's what I got. And and I just remember one day having this thought of I couldn't remember the last time I thought about drinking, like really wanting to drink. I couldn't remember it. And I was really trying hard to like remember a day or a time, the last time I could remember thinking about drinking. And I was probably 7, 8 months sober. And I couldn't think of the last time. And that blew my mind because that had been my only thought for years of my life. So that blew me away. And I really knew, like, okay, something's different. Something's happening here. And I was just working steps, with this guy and discovering who I was and what was important to me for the first time in my whole life. And it was working.
Yeah. So what was important to you at that time? Do you remember, like, that early sobriety?
Oh God. I can remember the promises of the third step. And I had read through that step 1,000,000 times. I had the big book on cassette. I thought, I was the kind of guy who goes and memorizes the book so that I can go to a meeting and sound like I know what I'm talking about. And but I remember I'd given up that position, and I really started to just like, I don't know anything, teach me, I'll do whatever you say, with the sponsor. And I remember getting to the third step with him, and right before the third step prayer, it says, it talks about wanting to see what you could contribute to life. And he asked me to tell him what I had contributed to life so far. And I couldn't think of a thing. I couldn't think of a single thing positive that I had contributed to life, my own or anybody else's. And so that became my motive, to become someone who could contribute to life.
Yeah.
And and I have. And it's the thing I'm most grateful for.
Big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
And so what's your relationship with this higher power, your spirituality? What's that like today?
Oh man, when I first came in, I thought they were talking about imaginary friends. I always say that, but that's true. I was like, y'all got your imaginary friends, you're all crazy. But I got an imaginary friend now, and we're tight, and that's what I see. I mean, the longer I stay sober, the more, to me, I see that a relationship with the God of my understanding is the absolute most important ingredient. It enables everything else that I get to be and do, and when that's the center of what I'm doing every day, then my motives are good, and I enjoy my life, and so I take it very seriously, that connection and that relationship.
Yeah. So, what are some of the best things that have happened to you since you've been sober?
Oh man, definitely. I feel like I've become someone who contributes to life. I feel useful.
Yeah.
I have a purpose beyond just like, practicing the principles in all our affairs, trying to pull that off, which I'm fail at all the time. But I always, no matter what's going on in my life, have this purpose now to help other alcoholics.
Yeah.
And I had no direction or aim or purpose. And I feel like as long as I always have that opportunity, that's extremely important. So that's been given to me. Renewed relationships with everybody in my life. That's probably one of the most important things. My sponsor, when I first started doing the steps, would tell me that relationships are what life is about. And I was like, no, it's not. It's about having fun, And he would be like, no, relationships what life's about. And I understand that today. And my father and I had been estranged. By the time I get sober, I made amends to him. And we've been best friends just like we were when I was 9 years old ever since.
Yeah.
And he actually moved about 20 minutes away from me, from my little hometown now, and he lives right around the corner. All my younger siblings, all my younger siblings that I was estranged from too, they all live around here except my brother, who's in the military and stationed overseas. And they know who I am, and that I don't think that they're ashamed of me, and I get to live in the way that they never saw me drinking, and they never saw what I became, and I get to be what I want to be to them today. Getting married, my wife is a godsend in my life. She helps me every single day, especially to be humble. She doesn't buy into the legend that I tell myself about me. In fact, she actively works to counteract my ego, and it's great. I need someone to say, you're embellishing that a little bit, honey. That kind of thing. But yeah, my relationship with my mom is great. We share our sobriety today. It's something we talk about a lot. She calls me and talks to me about her sponsees, and she just started a new big book study that she's doing right now. And so she's been calling to tell me how it's going every week,
Yeah.
And we get to share that with each other. Yeah, my older sister and I have a great relationship now. We had a horrible relationship all throughout our lives, but we have a good relationship, and those are the most important things to me, and that's what I'm most grateful for. Is I really have had all my relationships renewed.
It's a big deal. That's a
Mhm.
really big deal. What would you, what suggestion would you give to somebody if they're listening right now who's struggling with alcohol or drug addiction?
Um, I would say getting with the people in recovery, um, and to give up. Like if you were going to solve this problem, you would have already solved it by now. So why don't you just let someone show you how to get sober and just do whatever they tell you? That's all I know that I did different was I started just do it. I decided I can get drunk and high if this don't work, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but for once, I'm going to commit myself to doing these 12 steps. I'm going to do whatever these people tell me to do and see what happens. If it doesn't work, I can go jump off a bridge or get a bottle of whiskey,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
just surrender to the process, give up.
Yeah. Is there anything else we didn't cover that you'd like to share with?
About a million things. I,
That'll be for the next one.
oh man, there's a million things, man, that I would have liked to have talked about today besides my drinking. But yeah, big thing that I look back on now that I didn't realize early on in recovery was give up whatever picture you have painted of your future. If you painted a picture that you close your eyes and you can see what a spiritual hunter looks like, what his life looks like when it's just right, if he quits drinking, if everything goes well, just give that whole thing up and just let God be the painter. Let Him paint each day on day on day, and just take it one day at a time. That's become more important to me now that I been sober for over 15 years.
Yeah.
One day at a time is very, very important to me, and so I just want people to really take that seriously. Just one day at a time. Don't put a bunch of expectations on it. Just see where it goes. Go with the flow.
Yeah. I like let God paint the picture. I think that's pretty cool. Thank you so much for sharing your story, and I know you have a lot more to share, and that'll be part 2. We'll come back to Hunter at some point, and we'll get him to share some more stuff. But before I let you go, buddy, we have to do the rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
And in honor of my friend and our friend Sean, the actual I don't have a button to push, but here's the rapid fire voice. There you go. That's it. That's all I got.
I like it.
All right. So, what is your favorite recovery slogan?
I would probably say, "Let go and let God."
What is your least favorite recovery slogan?
Fake it till you make it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is your sobriety superpower?
That one's hard. I think I'm good at communicating an idea.
If you could say one thing to your former self, what would it be?
God, I have no idea. I don't know. It'd probably be whatever the lottery numbers are and what day. If I'm honest, like get to an AA meeting. Here's the lottery numbers for Wednesday, February, whatever, 2025.
What song do you play to lift your spirits when you need a boost?
Oh man, I like sad stuff. I'm awful. I like sad old country music and stuff. Makes me feel good. That's how messed up I am. But I would say there's a song called "Crooked Road" by Daryl Scott, and I think it's the perfect song, the journey of recovery and what it is.
If you could grant yourself one wish to help with your recovery, what would it be?
Hmm. To be able to be more present, just in the moment. I think not worried about things outside of what's right in front of me.
What step do you love the most?
Oh, I think the ninth step. I think ninth step's my favorite because you get to that. I think that's where I think you really separate the men from the boys. I know they say it's some other steps, but when you have to go sit down in front of people and say, "Hey, I know I was a thief and a liar and a piece of crap and abusive and mean and awful, and I'm here to make up for that." That's a different ball game.
Yeah.
And once you do that, it's like you're new territory.
Yeah. What step do you love the least?
I don't really, man. I don't have any that I just dislike or don't love. Honestly, I don't have one, Joe. To me, it's all one thing now. It's not necessarily 12 steps at this point. It's just one thing, and it all works together. I don't really have one.
What is your favorite curse word?
Oh man, I would say son of a bitch.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh, I think I just want to be like, yeah, you're in. Don't worry about it. You're cool. I'm still not convinced. I just people start talking about heaven and hell, and I say, listen, if I get to purgatory, I'll probably be pretty happy. I don't know.
Well, Hunter, thank you so much. Just everybody, a new episode is released every Thursday at noon. You can listen to the show on your favorite podcast apps, Amazon Audio, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, and others. Just search for The Cup of Joe Show. Don't forget the, and would really appreciate it if you'd like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much, Hunter. I really appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you.
It's just a laid-back vibe, baby.
We hope you enjoyed today's Experience, Strength, and Hope. We are so grateful you decided to join us. Please share this episode with someone who might need it. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. Remember, no matter where you are in your recovery journey, you are not alone. Reach up and reach out to someone. Please do not suffer in silence. Until next time, let's take it 1 minute, 1 hour, and 1 day at a time. Thanks for listening to The Cup of Joe Show.